Hello, my fellow Alaskans. How are you guys all on this beautiful Thursday evening? The week is almost over with. Friday is almost here. We can almost taste the weekend. It is so close. I can feel it already. Tonight I am bringing to you guys all the Alaskans for Constitutional Rights and their investigation into the Alaska Grand Jury investigation into Alaska's corrupt judicial branch. David Egnell, I hope I said that right, I probably didn't, is going to be the top speaker, and he's going to be discussing the second half of his chapter 8 of his book. All the links to where, if you want to listen to the entire book itself, can be found on this live feed right now, and it will be there also later. You can also find all the links to the Alaska Grand Jury investigation of the state of corruption. All of those are provided on the links up above, and be able to deep dive into this investigation into the grand juries going on in the state of Alaska. And I am going to bear with me here. I am trying to make sure that they are not up and running yet. They should be starting here any time now. And I just need to keep refreshing that screen over there on their end. And we've already had David Haeg. We did a one-on-one interview with him about a week ago, or 2 weeks ago, I should say. We did an interview with him down there in the Soldotna area, and did a deep dive for about 45 minutes into what he and many other Alaskans are doing with their grand jury investigation, and how the judicial branch has illegally bypassed the setup in the rules and completely illegally shut down their investigation. Now, the rules that were changed because the investigation was already going before those rule changes were made. Not too sure what direction that may end up taking things, but it definitely has dark, deep-seated indications of what direction our judicial branch is heading. They are trying to cover up their corruption by what they had done. And I'll just keep on refreshing here, as they are supposed to be starting here at any minute. It was just a couple of minutes past 6:30 the last time when they started. So I know it should be starting here real soon, and as soon as it does, I think I got everything set up on my end to just immediately start capturing it, and we'll be live on all the different angles going on out there. So it should be here in just a minute. And the author and forensic journalist David Egnell will review the second half of chapter 8. If you're looking for other live streams of their Zoom sessions for Alaska Constitutional Rights, you can find that at AFCR 1776. That's AFCR 1776 on Facebook, or .com added on to the end of that, and you'll be able to find them really easy out there and get connected up to all their past broadcasts. That's right directly on their Facebook page there. And all of their past, they do this every Thursday from what I'm understanding. And I'm going to do my best to try to capture these as they happen on Thursday nights, so that they can get a much wider audience into the grand jury investigation into the Alaska's corrupt judicial branch that we have. And again, tonight's special speaker for the Alaskans for Constitutional Rights is going to be David Egnell. He is an author and forensic journalist. He has a book out there, and you can go and find that on his website, poweredbyjustice.com, Grand Jury, and you can listen to it there, download it, and you'll be good to go. I'm still refreshing here on the other screen, trying to see when they come up live. They start this all in on Zoom, but trying to recapture a Zoom is a lot more difficult to reshare it. It still is a lot of bandwidth to run that Zoom program. And even though I do have it here, I've been seeing what the luck we have had with, say, GCI here lately, or with the internet services from KTOO trying to restream their gavels of what's been going on down there in Juneau. A lot of stuttering, a lot of sputtering. I'm hoping tonight's broadcast will be smooth on the Facebooks. There we go. Now they're live. Let me get that.
Quick preamble. We're having David Egnell join us
mute that there on the screen so that you guys don't have to sit here and listen to it on my end. And let me make this go up. I should be able to have it on my screen now on the other side perfectly. Looks like it is. We'll transition over and we'll go ahead and get their sound up on the screen. At least I'm trying to get their sound up here on the screen. Some reason it looks like everything's stalled out there on Facebook.
Pretty close to.
That's what happened.
So if you can give some room for
okay, let me go back here again, and let's turn off the audio of my.
It's also one of the longest chapters, so I didn't want to rush through it, and make sure that we take our time. It tells us the intent of the founders in putting the protection of the grand jury into the Alaska Constitution. So I didn't want to. It's also one of the longest chapters, so I didn't want to rush through it, and make sure that we take our time and absorb what the founders thought about the grand jury, what they thought about prosecutors, and importantly, how those votes went down on the delegate floor. Just quick summary. Last week we covered how the grand jury, the concept of the grand jury, initially went to a committee of 7. I think there was 4 attorneys on that 7-person committee, and they came out with their recommendation. The most in their minds, the most important thing about the grand jury was the ability to investigate public officials. That was on the investigative. Side. On the criminal side, it wasn't a guaranteed right to Alaska citizens to have a criminal case reviewed by the grand jury. And so there was a lawyer in Anchorage, Ed Davis. He brought an amendment to the floor to make the grand jury a matter of right to any accused in a criminal case. And so we covered how the 2 preeminent legal authorities who were delegates, one was Ralph Rivers. He was a former Alaska Attorney General. And then there was Warren Taylor. He was a former U.S. Attorney. They had concerns about the about the lack of grand jury, but remember back then Alaska was an extremely poor state, and you know, people were concerned that it just wasn't worth the cost. And Rivers and Taylor expressed, or they signaled that they were going to go along with the committee recommendations. And that's when Yule Kilcher from Homer there stood up, and where we left off last week was middle of page 54 with his quote, and I'm going to read it again because it's so important. Mr. Kilcher says, "It is the only safeguard a citizen occasionally has when for any reason, and very often for political reasons, a case is not dealt with properly." And then he also added the grand jury. He finished by saying the grand jury can be appealed to directly, which is an invaluable right to the citizen. So that's where we left it last week. So this week I want to pick up with the next person who spoke. His name was Marvin Marston. His nickname was Muktuk. You'll see in my Mr. Marston, he was a miner. You know, he wasn't a lawyer. He was a miner, he was a soldier, and he became a businessman in Alaska. And you know, he's been notified as you know, a great Alaskan. You know, Ernest Greening Marston wrote a book about the role of Alaska Eskimos in World War II. And Senator at the time, Ernest Greening, introduced that as a story of epic dimensions and significance. And so Marston was a pretty important figure in our history. And he stood up and spoke, and his his quote appears on the next page, 55. And I'm going to read his paraphrase here in full. He goes, "Mr. President, may I speak on this? I had a case of an Arctic friend of mine who came afoul of the law and landed in the jail. And I took him out, got his bail, and the grand jury was good enough to send for me to talk to him. If that man had to sit there for trial, he wouldn't have had the money to fight it. He would have lost his job and been a derelict on the shores of white man's civilization. I went before the grand jury. They found what I learned was a no true bill handed to him, and he is a free citizen, has his job, and is doing all right. On that basis, I'm going to vote for Mr. Davis's amendment and preserve that grand jury. To me, this is a very important quote, because I think of Thomas Jack when I read this. I think of an Alaska Native who was falsely accused. You know, basically the system ran him out of money, and you know, the grand jury was lied to, but they didn't do their job. If they had done a little bit of investigation, they would have found that these charges were false. And so, you know, and you know, this line about been a derelict on the shores of white man civilization. You know, we've got 40% of people in prison are Alaska Natives, and they represent about 16% of our population. And I think, you know, a lot of these people are taken advantage of. And they become derelicts on the shore of white man civilization. And this is 70 years after, 60 years after Marston spoke these words. So you know, I wanted to draw attention to that. Moving on down the page, the next person I quote here is Robert McNeely. He was a lawyer from Fairbanks. And just a side note here, McNeely was an outspoken opponent of the Alaska judicial system. He saw that it was going to bring politics into judicial selections. Unfortunately, the rest of the delegates couldn't see that, but he spoke up. He spoke up loud and clear about how the Alaska Judicial Council was a bad concept. But he become a little overzealous and want to secure a number of convictions and in some of those instances, a grand jury will return a no true bill. So, you know, here's McNeely was a lawyer. He was on the Rights Committee. And in his experience, prosecutors become a little overzealous. So I think that's important to point out that, you know, the problem that we have with prosecutors in Alaska today, you know, it was recognized by our founders, and for that reason, someone like McNeely saw that the grand jury did serve a purpose. Going on to the next page, page 50. Well, let's see. On the next page, page 56, I do want to talk a little bit more about McNeely. When he spoke at this time, he was he talked about the inability of the public to hold their prosecutors accountable through the election process, thereby increasing the dangers of prosecuting on information without the involvement of the grand jury. And in that quote, he says, but the only thing that could offset that would be if the state prosecutors are elected and not appointed by the Judicial Council. Then it may be that since they are elected officials, they may not be so prone to jump out and start prosecutions under information. So one of my objectives in this coming year is to seek a constitutional amendment, not only for how we select our judges, but also that we select our prosecutors, put it more on a local level. I think local citizens ought to have the ability to elect local prosecutors. And this is what McNeely is talking to here. He's saying that if you elect prosecutors, they're going to be more accountable to the public. And this is the problem that we have. We don't elect our prosecutors, and so they're not accountable to the public. So I thought that was an interesting quote by McNeely, and wanted to point that out. Moving on down the page in the next paragraph, I cite to Ralph Robertson. He was a very well-known Juneau attorney. And actually, my first year of law school in Juneau, I clerked for the law firm of Robertson, Monago, Eastaugh, and Bradley. And so, he was the founder of that firm. When you going in the middle of the page there, I have a quote from him. He goes, "I have defended a good many of the accused. I have watched for the past several years down in the First Division, which is Juneau, and it seems to me that the use of an information against the accused is being greatly overdone and being done without entire fairness to the accused." So here we have, an esteemed lawyer in Alaska talking about how, about false allegations. And he ends up voting for the grand jury. The next person, at the bottom of that page, 56, the first paragraph, I talk about Mildred Herman. She's a lawyer from Juneau who had been a resident in Alaska since 1919. So she'd been around for 26 years. What I like about her story is that Miss Herman came to Juneau as a school teacher from Indiana, but later became a lawyer. She studied law under Judge Wickersham, who many of you may have heard of before. He was a famous judge in Alaska, and she took correspondence courses. But it's her going to the next page. She had a rather long quote. And I'm going to read that in full because I think it's important. She goes, I thought I would stay out of this hassle, but I feel constrained to stand and say I approve of Mr. Davis's amendment, and I also have had a considerable volume of experience as a defense attorney. I also have seen the misplaced zeal of some of our district attorneys that Mr. Robertson mentioned. In my 20 years experience as an attorney in the courts of Alaska, exclusively, have given me no reason to have too much reverence for district attorneys, even though I have one in the family, and I think very highly of him. And that sentence right there had been underlined by David Haeg, or highlighted by David Haeg. And she continued, the fact of the matter is that I have seen a great many innocent people plead guilty rather than wait for the grand jury to meet. I have also seen innocent people convicted. Not a lot of them, but I have seen it enough to know that it is done and that our system of justice as it now stands is far from perfect. There is no reason on earth why a grand jury cannot be called to be available any time that there is business to be considered, and that the indictments by the grand jury can be preserved in that way. But there is also a considerable volume of people that appear to be tried, that appear in court, that are unjustly called there. I don't believe in protecting the guilty, but I do believe in protecting the innocent until they are proved guilty. I have from personal experience found that the grand jury protects the public, not the criminal or the alleged criminal, but the public as a whole. To me, again, this is a very important quote. You know, she talks about the misplaced zeal of some of our district attorneys. We have that same problem today. She doesn't have much reverence for some district attorneys. And here's a founder that doesn't have much reverence for them. She says she's seen a great many innocent people plead guilty rather than wait for the grand jury to meet. I've been told by people up north that there's a lot of innocent people who plead guilty, especially people out in the bush or Alaska natives, because they know they're not going to get a fair trial. So we still have this problem today. And then she talks about the very last sentence. I have from personal experience found that the grand jury protects the public. And that's what we're talking about. We need protection. This is why all of us today are listening to this and have interest in the grand jury, because we need protection from the government. Going down to the bottom of page 57. Mr. Davis, who was Ed Davis, the Anchorage lawyer who brought up this amendment, he speaks for a final time, and I'm going to start by quoting the very last sentence.
Everybody, quick preamble. We're having David Ignell join us and share with us about chapter finish.
Present evidence to, and they're stopped by the district attorney and by the judge. So what has been happening down in Kenai, Mr. Davis in the middle of this quote, he kind of refers to I think what he's referring to, investigative grand juries, in addition to regular grand juries. And so this is what I called for down in Juneau. I called for a special investigation because I knew that it would take all the items, and the judge didn't even read my petition. So I didn't get Davis's quote there, page 60. A delegate, so Delegate Lucien Barr, this is the second new amendment pertaining to the grand jury. Mr. Davis had introduced an amendment as to ensuring that every citizen had a right to a grand jury in a criminal indictment. So now we have Mr. Barr, interesting person. He's not an attorney. He's a former cavalryman, a parachute jumper, and a test pilot. And he came to Alaska in 1932 to work on a Yukon gold expedition. And for a while, he served as a U.S. Marshal. And this is where we start seeing develop that ultimately shows up in the Constitution today. His amendment reads, the power of grand juries to investigate and make